Okay guys, so now we can go into the dovetails for the bottom of our toolbox, our tool tote. So I've already drawn the outline for my panel here, and as I said in the previous video, I need to draw dovetails that resist the force of gravity and also the weight of the heavy tools inside the tool tote. So I'm going to create a second geometry from the right viewpoint that indicates the side of my panel. So I'll just use rectangle. Oh, I forgot that it always does that. Rectangle unfortunately does not have the same properties as Smart Track, even though you kind of want it to, but I can turn Smart Track on, lock into there, and then give it the height, which is going to be 1/2 inch. And it didn't work. Okay. So old-fashioned way, just using polylines. Say 1/2 inch. And then using Smart Track, it should give me some closed geometry there. So I'm just going to double check, make sure it's all in the same plane, and it is. Now I can go back into my right view and figure out what my dovetails will look like. So I might actually explode this rectangle, which is the opposite of joining. So now it's 4 open curves. And let's say that I want my dovetails to be all equal size. I don't want to be that fancy with them. I can say divide. So select this curve to divide. And how many segments do I want it to divide? So I like to use odd numbers with dovetails. I like to have a centered tail rather than having equally offset tails. So I'll say 7. And then I know that I want my 1:8 ratio. So I'll just create a little reference for myself by saying 1 and 8. And then here is my angle. I'm going to turn off Smart Track because I find it a little annoying to use. And then I'm going to mirror it as well. And that way I have both of those angles available to kind of copy and paste onto this geometry here. So I'll start with this guy using the copy command. Select the point that I want to copy from, and I need my point snap-on. And I believe that's all that I need from that particular angle. And then hit return to go into that same command again. Okay, so you can see that I believe I have this the right way around. Might have to look at my sides just to kind of visualize it. So those are actually going to be, that won't have a center tail really. As you can see, if these are my tails here, actually I will have a center tail right there, just off center pins. Okay, so that should work. So now I can use the trim command. Let's try that again. Select cutting objects. That's this line here. Enter. So sometimes when something is inadvertently already selected, when you go into command, it can kind of mess you up. So it can help to just retry the command without anything selected. Okay, so I have all of these parts selected. now I have these lines here to indicate where my dovetails will be. So the tails are going to be on this side piece here. So I can make closed lines with these tails. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split these two horizontal lines. So split, objects to split, hit return, and then cutting objects. And all I'm trying to do is create closed curves to start extruding. Okay, so split into 13 pieces, it says right here. This is kind of like your history log. You can, if you want, make it bigger so that you have more of a view on what's been going on. Because I recently saved, there's not that much going on right now. And I want to cut out my tails. With the outline of my pins. Oops. So there's one guy that did not get cut up here, so I'm gonna delete these sides. Oh, and what's going on is that actually I did not use this as a cutting object, so it did not split this side piece all the way. Okay, so I'm going to re-split these guys. Okay, and now I should be able to make closed curves. I'm going to delete that curve because it's confusing me. And Gumball is kind of getting in my way right now. I'm going to hide that as well. Okay, so I have the outlines of the pins here. And I'm going to group those because there's not really a reason for them to stay individual. And you can see now I can extrude these pins for the 1/2 inch thickness that they're passing through the side. And I'm going to make sure that I'm in my bottom layer. And I might actually start putting some stuff into the slush folder because it's starting to get crowded too. Okay, so now the only thing in my bottom layer will be my solid extruded pins. So this sounds like I'm having some sort of weird geometry going on. So I'm going to check out the properties on these guys. They don't. Nothing really strikes me as being wrong with them, so I'm just gonna extrude and see what's going on with it. So I don't want it both sides, but I do want it solid. And because I'm going towards the y-axis, I'm again going to have to do a negative dimension, so negative 0.5. And they look fine, so I'm not really sure what that objection from Rhino was about. I'm going to turn off those extra lines, turn on my sides, and I'm going to group these extrusions. And now I can do a Boolean difference. And you can see now I have my pins passing all the way through, and they've cut out my dovetails for me. And I should be able to reflect these guys to the other side with mirror. Sometimes it can be easy to lose track of which side you already did. Okay, so now I have my pins and tails. I'm still just missing my panel. And like I was saying, my panel is going to be trapped in a groove along the side. So I'm going to again have to make kind of a rabbit cut along the edge. So let me make some geometry for that rabbit cut. First I'll extrude the bottom. But I actually may have lost that geometry. I think I cut up my rectangle pretty well. I'm just going to use my snaps to redraw my rectangle. This rectangle actually isn't intersecting those sides, so I'm going to redraw it. Anytime I'm deleting something, I'm just hitting the delete key. Sometimes I forget to explain stuff that is sort of second nature at this point. Okay, so now I have my curve. I'm going to extrude it upwards. 1/2 inch, make sure it's solid. And then that outline should be able to just go into the slush folder. And the next thing I want to do is create that rabbit on the side, so that way it's trapped in a groove. So I might just create some unrelated geometry, so I can just copy this guy. Delete or hide the sides so that they're not getting in my way. Oops. Okay, so I have my second geometry here, which I'm going to use to cut those rabbits. And I'm going to turn Gumball back on. So I want my rabbits to be cutting away enough so that there's a little kind of tongue that can fit into the groove along the side. So when I use Gumball, I'm going to move this down 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to move it into my geometry 1/4 inch. So you can see if I look at it from the end, it's intersecting by 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch there, which should be perfect for my rabbit. So Boolean difference. And you can see I created that little slot right there. it is possible, this is sort of like the ideals of a 3D rendered object. It is possible that I will have to, I'm not actually sure why this is not the right height. Okay, so one of these guys is the wrong height. I'm just going to double check on it. So I'm going to say dimension linear. So linear just means orthographic. So I can see if I really zoom in that there's a little bit of a step going on. So that's telling me that that bottom board is indeed a 1/2 inch. Let's check on those pins because they don't look like a 1/2 inch now. Yeah, they're 0.49 for whatever reason. Okay, so that's kind of odd. So there's some stuff that you can do to kind of like extend the surface back to the original geometry I'd intended, but I think it will actually just be faster for me to redraw these guys. So I'm going to hide this. And actually probably this guy too. And good thing I did not delete my geometry, I just put it in my slush. Or actually maybe I put it in my line. Yeah, I put it in my line layer. So this might have been what was telling me before that there was some sort of error. You can see just zooming up, it's not quite a 1/2 inch. I'm going to hide these guys too. Delete those guys, I can always reflect it again. Put this on my slush layer. Okay, so now I shouldn't really have anything in my way from correcting this. So I'm going to double click on my right. Get rid of these guys as I know that they're at the wrong length. It looks like this entire piece is at the wrong length, unfortunately. So just gonna go back so that I don't have any interfering geometry and go back to the origin. So 8 inches wide, 1/2 inch thick. I'm going to explode it again, divide to 7. So as you can probably tell, if a mistake goes unchecked for too long, it can really be difficult to correct it. But in this case, it didn't go too far. So back to my 4 closed curves that I can extrude from and group. Okay, and this time it didn't give me that pop-up, so I'm guessing whatever weirdness was going on is gone now that I've corrected that dimension. This time I'm going to do the Boolean difference all at once by mirroring the geometry ahead of time. Okay, so now I have my pins and tails one more time. Okay, so now going back to cutting that groove. So now I can say show to bring that geometry that I hid. This is the side that I cut the rabbit. So what I was starting to say before I noticed how off that geometry was is that in reality, this rabbit would probably continue through the pin and I would have this little notch cut out here. This is sort of like an idealized version of what those dovetails would look like. I could also only have a partial groove with a partial tongue going on if I did a drop cut on the table saw, but we'll get that more into that later. Right now, I'm kind of concentrating a little bit more on what an ideal situation would be. So I'm going to move this up by 1/4 inch again so I can use my snaps. Okay, so that's corner to corner again. Now I can move it back by 1/4 inch and move it in by 1/4 inch. And creating that same geometry. Okay, so now I have my rabbit on both sides. And then this guy is one board, so I'm going to start treating it that way and group it. If I ever need to undo a group command, I can just say ungroup, so it's pretty straightforward. Put this in my slush part. Okay. And now I should have my sides, and I can cut that groove now with the bottom. Now if I pull these guys away, you'll see that I've cut a little 1/4 inch groove that's gonna keep the bottom from sagging and trap it there. Okay, so now I have my completed tool tote. There's a number of things I could do now to make things easier on myself in the shop. If I want to see what this would look like more realistically and not color-coded, I can put the rendered view on it. And that kind of creates artificial light sources that are bouncing off of it in like a neutral tone. I could even start dragging like materials onto it at this point to see like what type of species of wood would look nice. This particular mode though does put a lot of stress on the graphics card in your computer, so I wouldn't recommend having it in that mode all the time. Another thing I can start to do is pull dimensions. So I can either do a linear dimension, which is along orthographic lines, or I can do an aligned dimension. So say that I wanted to, I don't know why I would want this measurement, but let's say I would want the length of the angled dovetail here. And then I can also, if I say dimension styles, I can start to like, right now I'm on inch decimal. So I could go into inch fractional, or I could double click on inch decimal and I can say how precise I want it, whether I want it to the nearest thousandth or hundredth or 10,000th. I can control how big that text is. Same with my angle. Maybe I want my angle to be like to the nearest thousandth. And I can start pulling dimensions all over the place. Instead of continuing to treat this as a 3D object, I can use the command make 2D. Oh, and I have to select it. So the viewpoint that you see in the perspective is the perspective that you're going to get for your make 2D drawing. So that's saying current view plus your orthographic views. That's actually a little bit different than it normally is. Typically it's an orthographic view. Let me try that one more time. Make 2D. So for view USA. Okay, and it will typically drop to my top layer. And you can see I have an orthographic view, so I have my front, top, side, and then I also have a 3-dimensional view as well. So that can be really useful for when you want to print something out and bring something into the shop with you. Actually, I'll bring that back. You can see it automatically put itself on another layer, so I can make all the other layers invisible and just work with these layers here. And you can see it has visible lines, and I could add a hidden lines layer as well. I could also just bring these guys all closer together. Actually, I don't really like this dimension. It's not very helpful. Oops. Okay, third time. Okay, so let's say I wanted to print this out and be able to bring it into the shop. What I can do now is say export selected. And I can save this as a PDF. And now you'll see it's going to automatically try to scale it to a typical letterhead size paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of scaled to fit, I'm going to set it to a specific scale. Maybe I'll have to do landscape mode. So 1 to 4 will work pretty well. I'll have to fiddle around with my viewpoint because you can see here, since I'm not zoomed equally on my piece, that's actually affecting the viewpoint. So I'm going to try that again. And now it's nice and centered, so I can set that to quarter scale, which is pretty typical, and I could print that out on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I believe that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you guys. There's definitely a ton of resources out there, so feel free to check stuff out on YouTube. This help tab is really helpful, which is kind of redundant, I guess, to say. And then also just send me a text or call me or email me if you're stuck on Rhino. We could even possibly do a video call and screen shared with each other, so that way I could walk you through geometries in Rhino. This is just something that doesn't require shop access, just computer access, so I think a lot of you should be able to benefit from learning this software, especially if you're going into the furniture or woodworking industry. Pretty much all shops use some type of CAD right now, and once you learn one type of CAD, it's fairly easy to transfer that skill set over to multiple types. I think that's everything I wanted to cover today.